Propulsion continues to be normal.
Chamber pressure looks good.
Doubling up. Roger, roll, Atlantis.
Water towers can fly! Yes!
Tango Delta nominal.
Flight outside SCE off. Bring in SCE off. Off.
Yikes. You bet. Concur. We don't need any more of these.
All right. How are we doing, everyone? Oh, love the energy. Excellent. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our Astronomy Night here at the Intrepid Sea, Air, and Space Museum. And hello to everyone tuning in at home as well. My name is Alicia Siegel. I'm the producer of public programs here at the Intrepid Museum. And I'd like to welcome you all formally to our Free Friday and Astronomy Night. Very glad you all could show up, and so many of you did. So great to be here. Everyone, one more round of applause for that. All right, I'm so glad we're having fun. We've got so much fun stuff going on here tonight. Activities, hopefully you saw some of those demonstrations down in the hangar. We've also got some telescopes and friends from the Amateur Astronomers Association out there on our flight deck a little bit later. And in just a minute, you are going to hear from our special guests. Right behind me, Mr. Mike Massimino and Mr. Fred Haise. But before we get to that, everyone, did you know that this year is actually the Intrepid Museum's 40th anniversary? Happy birthday is right. Way back in 1982, everyone, this amazing aircraft carrier was rescued from the scrapyard, and it has since been converted into a world-class museum that is now part of the fabric of New York City. So we are celebrating all year long with our Free Fridays and movie nights. We've got exhibits. We've got special programming just like this one. Also, if anyone has seen online, our spectacular virtual Astronomy Live program every month with our partners at NASASpaceflight.com. Anyone ever shown that? Any fans? Virtual Astronomy Live? Yeah, all right. And also, plus, we've got some special 40th anniversary programs as well that are taking you inside of some of the coolest stuff in our collection. So keep your eyes peeled for more of those. But without further ado, the reason you all are here, of course, I would like to welcome to the stage, right behind me here, we have two amazing people that need no introduction, but of course I'm going to do it anyway. Our moderator for the evening, Mr. Mike Massimino, and of course our infamous Apollo 13 astronaut and subject of the new autobiography, Never Panic Early, Mr. Fred Haise. Now, Mr. Haise started his NASA career as a research pilot before serving as backup lunar module pilot for the Apollo 8 and Apollo 11 missions, and as the lunar module pilot for the notorious Apollo 13 mission. He also was the backup spacecraft commander for the Apollo 16 mission and was meant to command the Apollo 19 mission until its cancellation. His book, Never Panic Early, shares intense and incredible highlights from commanding our revolutionary space shuttle Enterprise right behind you. How cool is that? So cool to have you here, really. During its approach and landing tests to surviving a nearly fatal accident during an air show. And it takes readers through the ups, downs, and unexpected turns of his career. So as a reminder, we will be doing a book signing right after this presentation. But let's get right to it. So everyone, please give a warm welcome to Mike Massimino and Fred Haise.
Well, thank you all very much for coming. Fred, thank you especially for being here. What a thrill for me to be up here with you. It's quite an honor for me. And the book's great. Congratulations to you and to Bill, who's here, who'll help you write it. But a great book here. And there are so many things that we can talk about. I think almost any aspect of your life, which is documented here, is something that we could spend a lot of time. The stories you have that I just heard here in the last few minutes are absolutely amazing. So we'll get to as many as we can. But if you want more, this book is available, and also your website, fredhaise.space.
Yeah, some people got the book that are space fans, and they said it was too short. So I created a website, www.fredhaise.space, and it has narrative and behind the narrative pictures and archival data, where I collected a lot of archival data that will be on that website that kind of so it goes across chronologically, but that doesn't match the book exactly chapter for chapter. But you can get more information for those that are real space fans.
So there you go. Well, we'll try to hit some highlights here for a while, and then we'll open it up to some questions. So, Fred, why don't we start kind of from the beginning? Grew up in Biloxi, Mississippi. Probably at that time, no idea of where life was going to take you. All these amazing things that you have done up to the present day, including the book. You could have never anticipated any of that. But tell us some of the highlights that happened growing up, and your journey, because it wasn't a straight journey, right? You went to junior college, and then you went to join the Marine Corps, and there you go. And all time. But take us through some of that, some of the highlights from your early life that led you to becoming a pilot, to becoming a test pilot.
Okay, but Biloxi was a very small town, a number of small towns along the Mississippi Gulf Coast, 14,000 population, and very young. I started working shining shoes because the World War II had come along, and all at once Keesler base opened in one of Gulfport, and the small town was inundated with people walking around wearing khaki uniforms, because over 100,000 airmen moved in being trained in World War II. And I noticed they all needed shine shoes. So I got a box and shoe polish cans, a couple of them, and a brush and a rag to buff them, and sold shoe shines for a nickel. And doesn't seem like much, but this is in the early 40s, and a nickel would get you 5 Tootsie Rolls, a Hershey bar, a cold drink. So that was great. And then I became a newspaper boy and earned more then. I earned $17 a week. I had 170 papers and the customers, and so I moved up in the world. And then I got interested in journalism. That's really what I thought my career was going to be. I got interested in high school working on a newspaper, the high school newspaper, as sports editor. And first community college I went to for 2 years, majored in so-called journalism. I was editor of the paper 1 year and planned to continue that career, but the Korean War had come along, and I decided to serve my country. I had 3 members of my family, including my dad, who was on a minesweeper in the Pacific and got sunk. My dad survived, and I had an uncle that didn't in Europe, and another Marine uncle on 2 campaigns in the Pacific. So I said I should serve my country, and I joined the Naval Aviation Cadet Program because my dad said, join a program that will get you a commission. You become a commissioned officer. And I finished high school and then junior college. I finished high school at 16 years old, and I finished junior college at 18. So the only service I could go into to get the commission was the Naval Aviation Cadet Program, the NAVCAD program. So I was on my way to become an aviator, which my dad wasn't too happy with. He was a ship Navy guy, and he actually thought I should go into submarines. Rickover was getting big in submarines then, Admiral Rickover. And so he was disappointed first that I went to fly in an airplane. And I was going to become a naval aviator, a commissioned ensign. And along the way, unfortunately, I got to advanced training, and they were going to put me in seaplanes. And I decided that then I'd become a Marine cadet, and so I could get fighters or bombers or attack the airplanes. So that's what I ended up in the Marine Corps. And VMF 533, 1 fighter squadron, and then I ended up in the second VMF 114. It was another fighter squadron. And finishing my time in the Marines, I got the idea of becoming a test pilot. So that required more credentials, resume-wise, from what I'd read in books about the the early pioneers in the X series aircraft, I knew I needed a technical degree, preferably an engineering degree. So I did that. I decided to go back to school and went to the University of Oklahoma, and primarily there because it had conveniently a fighter squadron within the Air National Guard. So I actually transformed my commission from Marine Corps to Air Force to join the Guard Squadron so I could continue flying high-performance aircraft while I was in college, and for 3 years to get an aeronautical engineering degree. And so I really have 3 discharges. I have a discharge as a Navy cadet, a discharge as a U.S. Marine, and then a discharge from the Air Force, because in 1961, I was recalled in the Ohio Guard unit into the Second Berlin Crisis during the Cold War period. So I served in 3 different services. But at any rate, finished Oklahoma and thinking about what to do next, and I had the idea of this test pilot. And my squadron commander, Stanley Newman in Oklahoma, recommended I join NACA, N-A-C-A. This was the predecessor to NASA, to NASA, and was heavily involved in all its centers more toward aircraft and enhancing performance, enhancing safety, that kind of thing. And before my graduating period, it became NASA. The space program evolved, of course, with Sputnik and the Russians' activity that was making us look bad. And so the U.S. set off on a space program with Mercury established. And by the time I joined NASA in 1959 at Lewis Research Center as a research pilot, they had picked the original seven astronauts. Now, frankly, I and others at that point that were in the flying business didn't necessarily think that was the thing to do. We looked at Mercury as a vehicle. It was obviously a novel thing to go in space and kind of prove humans would survive in space. But there wasn't much piloting with the Mercury capsule. And we were pilots, and we wanted something we'd control and command and, you know, have that kind of activity. And also didn't know that that would be the end. Maybe they'd fly Mercury and do their thing, and that'd be it. That'd be all there was to the space program. Well, obviously that evolved differently with John F. Kennedy in office and wanting to do something to get back ahead and show us ahead of the Russians with the formation of the Apollo program. In the meantime, I wanted to move also from Lewis to the Mecca of flight tests for NASA, which was at Edwards Air Force Base at Flight Research Center. And that's where they had the X-15 program at the time, and after 3 years, I managed to transfer there. Neil Armstrong was ahead of me 3 years. Neil had also started at Lewis Research Center as a NASA test pilot. He had gone on to Edwards. He got to fly the X-15 and had gone into the astronaut program. And I was still not quite sure I wanted to become an astronaut, and Neil came back and visited once back at Flight Research Center, and Don Malik, another pilot, and I cornered Neil and said, "Neil, what's it like being an astronaut?" And Neil said, "Well, you sit in a lot of meetings, you sit in a simulator a lot, and it's not much good flying." Because he was thinking of our days at Edwards, where we flew almost every day and flew a multitude of different kind of aircraft. Like 1 month in my logbook I used to go back and talk about the old days at Edwards. Back at Flight Research Center, I picked 1 month where I flew 9 different types of aircraft, 3 different test programs. And so this astronaut program wasn't that. And I had to think hard, but what convinced me was 2 things. One, whether we were going to get to fly the X-15 or not, which I'd have loved to fly, I was about 3 down in seniority in the office. So I knew I would never get, and we went by seniority as to how you moved up to get to fly the X-15. I knew I'd probably never get there before that program ended. Then the other thing was Apollo had evolved by this time, and with the Apollo lunar missions. And I said, well, going to the moon would be a pretty exciting adventure. So I said, well, I'll apply, and I did, and was accepted in 1966 to move to another center, which for me was like no pay raise. I just kept the same GS rating, and moved to another center down at Houston to join the astronaut program.
So that was in you were Group 5, right? So you were
Group 5.
the fifth group selected, and that's where we now in 19. What year is this?
66.
1966. So this must, I was selected by NASA in 1996. 30 years later, it was very exciting to be there, but I can only imagine what was it like walking in the door there in 1966. So this is Gemini is going on at this point, right?
Right.
Mercury's over, Gemini's going on, and you guys are getting ready to go to the moon. What was that like, walking in the door and being there at that time?
Well, the way it was set up was very much like it is today. There's a rookie training period. And
Did they call you ass cans?
No, they didn't call us ass cans.
They
but,
called us astronaut candidates. They weren't so sure when they hired us.
Yeah, right.
You guys were astronauts from the start. That's good.
But they had a program laid out for about 12 to 15 months of training of various sorts, geology field trips, some classroom, etc. And the busyness was, and schedule pressure was such that they needed more hands covering the waterfront. So they really curtailed our training in that light at about 9 months. And we got then assigned as support crew. My first support crew assignment was with Ed Mitchell, who landed on the moon on Apollo 14. Ed and I were assigned to Jim McDivitt, who was slated to pilot the first lunar module in Earth orbit, on an orbital mission, which was Apollo 9. And Ed and I went to see Jim in his office and said, what do you want us to do, Jim? He had very simple instructions. He said, I want you to go at Grumman, and I want you to make sure I got a good limb to fly. And that was it. That was our marching orders. So Ed and I lived most of the next 14 months at the Grumman plant out here on Long Island at Bethpage. And during that was intensive, incredible schedule pressure. Grumman in 1967 test operations on limbs that were in the flow in manufacturing and subsystem development and testing went on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. In 1967, had only one planned shutdown day, Christmas Day. That was it. We lost one shift in February from heavy snow where one shift couldn't get to work. So we shut down briefly to get the next shift in and go to work. But that's the way the schedule pressure was and the work activity. Very challenging, but also very hard on people and families. I really appreciate the sacrifice made by so many people in the program at that time to get the job done, because it was intense. And just continual schedule pressure to get through it. Same thing was going on out on the West Coast with the command and service module development, which I was never involved with. And of course, it was magnified when we lost the crew on the launch pad. We killed the crew on the launch pad on Apollo 1. And they had not just the same schedule pressure, but also regrouping with redesign and rework on the command module to make it safe to get it ready for the next flight. So the pressure was even more intense out at North American Aviation on the West Coast, and their subcontractors handling that on top of everything else. So it was that kind of days. I ran tests sometime. I probably slept in a limb, I figured 2 or 3 weeks, because the test activity go around the clock. First landing radar test I did on the limb went 23 hours straight. I did a landing radar test that was 27 hours straight. So if
you slept in the spacecraft at the plant?
I just laid on the floor. If it came to a halt in the testing procedure, I just lay down on the floor. If I knew it was going to be potentially a spacecraft problem, I would actually join a group up on the mezzanine with engineers, and would discuss what now the procedure was going to do to troubleshoot, to try to get to the source of the problem. So that's the kind of business that was going on, like I said, around the clock, forever. Now, Ed and I shifted. We needed to occasionally go home and see our family and change our underwear. So we would fly a 38s back to Houston, but one of us was always stayed. We always had one of us at Grumman during that whole period. You will find that, incidentally, my daily diary of that period in the website. When I said I put archival data, it was that kind of stuff you'll find on the website during that period.
Yeah, I find it interesting because you spent your years as an astronaut. It's not just flying in space; it's figuring things out. And there's no glamour involved there. sleeping in the spaceship all hours, being away from your family.
Right.
And that's really what the core of the job is that type of
Absolutely.
work, which
Yep.
which people see you fly in space, so that's really cool. But it's really a lot of hard work, dedication, hard on the family, and so on. So thank you for doing that, Fred. That was key to getting us there.
I feel blessed to have been a part, really, in a terrific program.
So you can clap this. There you go.
Yeah.
So thank you. So you were doing that as a backup for the for Apollo 9.
Right, a support crew.
Support. So different than backup. Support.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then from that, you went on to, was that your next assignment to be the backup for 8?
On 8.
Which is which is different because which I found reading the book. You were you guys backups meant you were part of the crew. Like you were ready to step in.
Well, we were
right
crew
at the last
ready.
minute.
We were a crew ready to fly. Because the problem was, if you didn't make the launch date, you're going to have to wait for the moon to go around a month to get back to the right spot to launch and hit the landing site with the right lighting conditions. So we were going to launch. If you had to, in those days, we could have changed out the whole crew the week of launch, and it wouldn't have mattered because we trained equally. And that was another problem for us from being away from home, because everything we did in training wasn't where we lived. The simulators we trained on were at Kennedy Space Center. We lived in Houston. We did geology field trips all over the country, and some Hawaii, Iceland, wherever. And the spacecraft we tested in were at the factories or down at Kennedy. So we had very little time with families at home. So it was really a hardship that way, even when you're on a crew assignment. And 8 was the hardest training cycle for me for 2 reasons. I'd spent so much time in the LEM, I knew it down to almost what pins and a 48-pin connector went to what, with the troubleshooting and the testing I'd been involved with, which wasn't needed to fly it. But I'd never been in a command module, not even sitting in one. And now I was on Apollo 8. It was a mission that didn't have a LEM. It had only the command module to go to the moon the first time on that Christmas in 1968. So I had a lot of learning to do to learn the command module that I might have to fly. And also the mission time was short, training time. For the first 6 weeks, we trained for the wrong mission. We were going to do a big Earth orbital mission, go up to about 4,000 miles altitude, and do a set of rendezvous with the lunar module. So that was the planned mission. And then after about 6 weeks, that's when NASA decided we're going to the moon. So we had to throw the flight plan that was being developed at the time, a lot of the contingency procedures that would be if you were out about the moon. We had to throw all that in a trash can and start over and start our training, basically, for the specific mission now we're going to fly all over. So it took 6 weeks out of what I call our training cycle. So, and I was pressured to also learn the command module, at least the part I had to know. So that was the toughest training assignment I had, was Apollo 8. The backup crew, incidentally, I was with Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin. We were the backup crew on 8. The prime crew was Frank Borman, Bill Anders, yeah. And so anyway, we were the backup on 8.
So what was backup from 8? Was there the possibility of you going on 11? You were backup for 11 as well, and then assigned to 13.
Yeah.
So, but 8 must have been really cool, because as you said, that was really the first time people left
Right.
low Earth, left the planet for real. When those guys did that, that must have been quite a time to be involved with that mission. I would imagine.
Well, yeah, it was developing a lot of new procedures like lost comm. What if you lost comm with the ground? There was some navigation capability in the command module simulator, not simulator, vehicle, with a program that you could do sightings on Earth and Moon, and you could navigate, but not as accurately as Mission Control could do with the bigger computers. And TRW was the contract that primarily did that analysis to do all the mid-courses to get back and forth. But you had to worry about, like, lost comm. You're going to be on your own out at the moon. And, of course, there was a concern of doing it the first time with only one flight that had fully tested the command module on particularly the service module engine, the SPS engine. Because if you're in lunar orbit and that engine doesn't work, you're going to be in lunar orbit a long time. So it was a little concerned about that, doing that just on the second time this vehicle flew. So it was some risk in taking that, but that was one way to hold the schedule and still make the landing as intended before the end of the decade.
Yeah. Seemed like quite a decision to change that flight, as you mentioned, from what you were going to do to now we're going to the moon.
Right.
They did it successfully at the end of 1968. And you were backup for the command module, and then your next assignment was backup on 11 for the lunar module, I would assume. Is that
Right.
Is
I
that what
backed
happened?
up Buzz Aldrin, who ended up flying 11 and landed on the moon. So I was his backup on 11. And that put us in line to fly Apollo 14, because you normally cycle 3 crews, three missions. And what happened is two of the members of the crew that were on Apollo 10 assigned to move to then 13 had not trained for a mission. Al Shepard and Stu Rusa had never served in the backup, and Al Shepard had not flown in quite a while. He had had the medical problem and had been reinstated, so he had not been in any training at all. And so Deke was sort of overruled, I think, by NASA headquarters and wanted to give them more training time. So Deke called in Lovell and Jim and asked him if he'd fly 13, move a mission ahead. And so Jim naturally said, yeah, we'll fly 13. That's great. We'll get to fly sooner. So that's how we ended up. The only time that was done, we moved a mission ahead of the one we were supposed to fly. So we were going to fly 14, and we ended up flying 13.
And being a backup on 11, of course, the significance of that. You back up on 8, the first trip to the moon, back up on 11, the first landing. So you trained everything that they were going to do on that flight to be the first to land.
Right.
On 11.
Yeah, but those are interesting because, they were sort of each in their own right. Development of specific mission rules, specific contingency procedures, those kinds of things. So it was really getting the book sort of pretty much done for what followed later, for all the flights later. They still had some minor refinements, but basically those were the milestone programs that kind of set the things in place for what followed for all the missions.
Yeah, but amazing to be associated with those missions. And then 13. 13 comes, the one that led to so much, the book, the movie. I remember as a kid hearing about what you guys went through. Take us through that, the lead up to 13, and then what happened? What was that like? And going to the moon, but the whole bit, which has become such a historic, significant story for all of us.
Well, 13 had a unusual thing. The only time it ever happened, in the week of launch, we were all primary and backup crew. We were all exposed to German measles. So it was COVID again, a different COVID virus that we all had been exposed to. And it turned out all of us had either had measles or had children who had measles and been exposed and had antibodies, because they took blood samples and sent them to some doctor that was the whiz on German measles in Cincinnati, I think, and he analyzed it and said Ken Mattingly, unfortunately, he was a bachelor, had never had measles, that he was highly susceptible to come down on the flight. So poor Ken was taken off the flight, and Jack Schweigert, command module pilot on the backup crew, replaced Ken 2.5 days before launch. Now, but as I said, the concept we had was we were trained to go fly the mission as a backup, immaterial of whether you were prime or backup. Now, normally, if one of the limb guys had gotten ill, you change out both limb guys, though. You change out the commander and the lunar module pilot. But the command module pilot was the guy that stayed in orbit, so he was have to operate on his own anyway. So he had to be totally capable with the command module. So that made it an easy swap of 1-for-1 in that case. So that was it was not a mission success or safety or anything else issue. It was a very personal problem and emotional problem we dealt with that crew change out. We'd worked as a crew with Jim TK Mattingly, Ken Mattingly through Apollo 11 back up, and now this mission we're finally getting to go and gets yanked off. Horrible disappointment. And of course then the change out with Jack. He was also a bachelor, incidentally, so he couldn't invite friends and relatives. He might want to come see the launch, come see him. Personal preference kit he could have flown for items people wanted to fly. So it's more that kind of thing, not the problem of going to fly the mission. So that we dealt with, right? And it's kind of made me, I'll say, not as emotionally excited or a little flat as I went out to the launch pad that day to launch, that we're now launching without Ken. And I knew Jack. He was in my group, so I knew him well. And it wasn't any personal thing that way. But that just changed the tenor of that day, that launch day for us. And I had seen it, the Apollo 8 and 11, I was on the backup, on the closeout crew. So I was the last one out of the capsule on both those missions. I was the last guy out of the capsule before they closed the hatch on both 8 and 11, and I could see those crews were really hyped. They were really ready to go. They were excited. And we didn't have quite that same excitement when we crawled in the capsule on 13. Start with. The mission itself went well. We only had one, I call it a minor problem, because it turned out to be minor. We had a shutdown of the middle engine on the second stage on the way up 2 minutes early, which for a few moments caused us a thinking problem that would cause us not to be able to go to the moon, because we knew if the engine shut down, it'd use more fuel getting us up and getting us in orbit. And the third stage with the single engine would have to burn longer to do that, to get us in orbit, so there might not be enough fuel left to get us to the moon. So we sweated that out for a little bit, but then the mission control figured out the reserves, and we'd be able to proceed. When we got on the way to the moon, everything was pretty calm, and Joe Corwin was the Capcom in Michigan. One time he piped up to us that just said, we're all bored to tears down here, because so everything was going so great. We staged a TV show, was planned at just after 2 days approaching the moon. We were about 200,000 miles out, a little more. And we had this show and tell TV show, and they just finished it, and I was still putting away equipment. We had pulled out equipment to talk about and explain for the audience. We thought no major networks carried that show. Mission Control enjoyed it. And I was still putting away stuff when we had this huge bang. Structures of spacecraft are metallic, so it's kind of like somebody pounding on something with a sledgehammer. And all the attitude jets, small 100-pound thrusters, were firing sporadically, trying to hold attitude, because what we saw later, we didn't realize that at the time, 1/4 of the service module had blown off with the explosion of an oxygen tank, and that had imparted a big torque to the vehicle. And in that turning torque, those attitude thrusters were automatically firing to try to hold attitude, to stabilize. From there, it went to go back up. I left the limb where I was. Jim had already started through the tunnel to get back to the mothership, the capsule. And when I got there, I saw an array of lights, about 7 caution warning lights. Very confusing. The spacecraft of those days was very simple. There was no centralized computer with integrated across systems like, well, your cars are today in some respects, but all airplanes. And systems were simplex for the most part. All stood alone. We operated most things manually. That's why you saw a lot of switches and circuit breakers on the panels. The only thing the computer did, and there was a 1/10 of a megabyte computer, 1/10 of a megabyte hand-wired computer that served guidance, nav, and control, and that was it. So there's no reason these lights are on systems that weren't connected in any way, so that was confusing. But the real thing that made me just sick to my stomach, when I scanned further on the instrument panel, 2 meters for oxygen tank 2 were in the bottom of the gauges. 2 different sensors, which are unlikely to fail simultaneously. So I knew we had lost that tank. We had lost tank 2. Now, that was not life-threatening because tank 1, the age next, set at the ages next, looked fine. And so we'd keep everything fully powered up, and we'd just have, but we'd abort. We'd have to come home. Couldn't go in the lunar orbit. I couldn't land. So I lost all that time training, getting ready, and now was my big chance, and it was gone in an instant. So, but it became more serious because Mission Control detected it quicker than we did, but the second tank 1 had a slow leak, and it was going down. So that was kind of, unless that we could figure out a way, and we worked the next 50-something minutes, almost an hour, doing different things of trying to stop the leak in that second tank. We knew that we had shut down, the vehicle would die. It depended on oxygen and hydrogen to feed 3 fuel cells. That was our major electric power. We had 3 small batteries, 44 ampere hour batteries, that was just to serve entry, and we couldn't use those. So it was, the handwriting was on the wall, so that's when Jim told me to head to the LEM and start getting the lunar module powered up. We hoped a good LEM, as it turned out it was, and I started the power activation, and then Jim joined me, and we finished up getting very hurriedly, got the lunar module going. So we had what was called a lifeboat, and it was a home, living quarters. It had power, it had communication, had propulsion system, the engine we're going to land on the moon with, and the same 100-pound attitude thrusters. So at least we had bought time, and that's the way the mission went from there, was just having time to buy to the next hole in the now new mission plan that was evolved. Gene Kranz kind of led a tiger team, picked people he got aside and developed this alternate plan on how we might get home. But there were holes in it and open items. And then we did it differently though than normally, or he did. Normally, if Mission Control had a problem they couldn't solve, they handed it off to the MIR, the Mission Evaluation Room, in an adjacent building to Mission Control, Building 30, and that MIR was in Building 45, right next door. And there was double doors, and they had a sign over those doors to that room that said, "God is welcome, all others bring data." And that room was with various experts, the program office people, management people. It had contractor engineers and management people. And they had communication links to all of that brain trust that was out across the country. Back at the factories, the factories actually designed and developed the vehicles and manufactured them and built them and got them ready for NASA to buy to get ready to launch. So that brain trust was out there available that they called on through that route. That was the way it was normally done. But Gene did it differently. He dispatched one person for an open item and said, "Here's the problem. You have the access to any human being you want in the United States, and I want you back here," and they gave him a date, maybe 2 days ahead. "You come back here with the answers we need." So it was a lot of pressure on specific people who many I talked to got less sleep on the ground than I got in flight during that period. But that's to shorten the bureaucracy, if you will, a bit. That's the way Gene handled that, to get the work done, and the right people dispatched to go work the problem. And so that's the way that was done over the next few days to work out the things to get us back.
And you worked around the clock to do that, and you made it.
Yeah, well, we loafed a lot of the times. We did
really?
in between the times they were figuring out the next thing to do, I was just looking out the window, enjoying the sight.
Well, you did. You might as well, and you did get to go to the moon, right? I mean,
right.
we hear that, and now But what was that? What was it like? I know you were working a major issue, obviously, and that was on the back. But what was it like when you got to the moon and were able to take a look and look back? What was that experience like?
There was a couple of sensations. As we went around the backside at a higher altitude than any flight, at 130-something miles. So we got a bigger, broader view of the backside. And I mean, the noticeable thing about the backside is it's different than the front, which had those large dark areas that people can vision facing the moon. The backside doesn't have many dark areas. It's more totally crater after crater after crater, rough terrain. Few of the ones we shot pictures of had Russian names. We shot good pictures of Tsiolkovsky and Sea of Moscow, which features major features we saw, but nowhere near as big as those dark areas on the front side. So more meteorites, bigger ones, apparently hit the side facing the Earth. But it was a disappointment because as we came to about where the sun line was on the moon, you could see our landing site from our. So there was where I might have been, was down there walking around, and I wasn't going to get to do that. So it was kind of a reminder, again, of our lost mission. So, but that was a lot of things we did. We used the descent engine 3 times. 1, 2, 3, yeah, 3 times. And we used 4-jet RCS using the small 100-pounders the 4th time for mid-courses we did. The first maneuver was critical, the one we did not too long after the explosion at 60-something hours. The explosion was at 55 hours, because we were not on a path that would have taken us back to Earth. So the first maneuver was critical to get us on that path going around the moon, which would have landed us in the Pacific, in the Indian Ocean by Madagascar. It was funny. The flight controllers had changed. Gene actually, Krantz took his team, white team, off duty, and Glenn Lundy's team came on in that same time period during the troubleshooting, even in that time period. And the guidos, the people who control the trajectory, asked him, where do you want them to go? And Glenn told him, I want them to come to Earth. That was his instructions. And so that's why they gave us a maneuver that put us into the Indian Ocean, Madagascar. And they later refined it to get us back into the South Pacific near the Samoan Islands with a major burn we did about 2 hours after passing the moon. That was the biggest, longest burn we did, using the landing engine, the engine we would have landed on the moon with, to get back in a direction that would have put us in the South Pacific, where we would have a recovery force with the Iwo Jima aircraft carrier and the trained Navy divers to retrieve us. So that's the way that went. I'll say the scariest time, a worrisome time for me of the mission, though, was you have to remember the command module, the mothership, the capsule, was never intended to be powered down in flight. Now, first of all, the mission control team, and about 25 years later, I went and dug out the tapes of the inner loops in mission control, and those people had to ad-lib how to shut the thing down because there was no procedure, and they were arguing technically about how to do it because they didn't want to damage anything. So in the mindsets, they were saying we're going to get this vehicle at some point down, so we're going to power it up and we're going to re-enter. So they had not given up the ghost. Made me feel good. And the other thing was now they had to figure a power-up procedure. There was none that powered up. So they had like 3.5 days to do that. So they got the procedure built. Challenge on board, Jack Schweigert had to copy it. We had no blank paper. So they had to rip the backs off of books, the checklist and whatever to use to write the procedure down. Jack carefully numbered the pages. And then Jack and I were going to power it up. Jim stayed in the limb, Lovell, the commander, and to keep attitude control and communication. So we're now 3 hours before entry interface. 3 hours before we're going to hit the air at 25,000 miles an hour. And we're allowed to go in there, and at 2.5 hours, we're allowed to start the power up. We couldn't start it up too early because we'd have used up those entry batteries. So they pushed us as late as they thought possible to start that power up. We crawled into this cold, dark, damp. Water was everywhere. The instrument panel, the first thing we got out, 2 towels to wipe off the instrument panel and see the meters. It was covered with water. And Jack looked at me, and the first step in the procedure was to push in all the circuit breakers on 2 panels, one on each side of the spacecraft. And Jack thought, well, there's probably water behind. So he said, I tell you what, he said, I'll give you a countdown, and we'll push in 6 circuit breakers at a time, and we'll stop for about a minute and see if we smell any insulation burning. We're worried about wiring shorts. So that's the way we went through getting the circuit breakers in, and we got through them all in and nothing. And what saved us was the Apollo 1 fire, the one that killed the crew, because part of the redesign was not just the hatch redesign, but the wiring protocol and hermetically sealing all connector interfaces. So it made the wire harnesses waterproof. Because there surely was water behind there around wire bundles and everything else. So that we got through that, and Jack got a good alignment with the computer now back up, the platform up. And you have to realize that thing was 4 days shut off, froze the water tanks. The water tanks were still found frozen when the capsule was recovered on Iwo Jima aircraft carrier and examined after entry. Still frozen. So we obviously exceeded the specifications on every piece of electronics in that vehicle by a lot. Well, it came to life with that alignment, and Jack controlled it through entry, and he let it do it automatically through the computer, now powered up. And from the records kept as best they could accurately say where we splashed down, we tied for the second most accurate splashdown of the program. It's incredible. Another minor miracle. Yeah.
How are we doing on time here?
So if we could take a few questions from the audience, does that sound good?
That sounds great.
Awesome. All right. So I saw your hand
Right.
shoot right up over here, if we're good.
Hi, my name's Rod Whitler. I'm from California. Tell me what you know about Joe Shea and his role in the Apollo program, and especially after the Apollo 1 fire. Joseph Shea.
Okay. I have to say I did not know Joe. I was down much lower in the ranks, and that's when I was off at Grumman. In fact, when the accident happened, I got a call from McDivitt. I was in a trailer next to Plant 5 where the limbs were being manufactured and tested. And Jim just gave me instructions, told me about the fire and said, come home, don't talk to the press. So that was my instructions. I never worked with Joe. I never was in any of the program meetings. As I understand, he obviously was greatly affected personally by that accident, and had some feeling of maybe he is the leader of the program manager, had some fault in that, which was not the case. I mean, it was maybe should have raised a flag earlier, but the problem was the situation at North American at the time, workmanship, and the way the protocol was, and specifications, if you will, for the wiring they did. And so much going on in the change-outs of things in the spacecraft. Subsystems were arriving late, so people were constantly moving stuff into the spacecraft, doing tests, and then they'd have to pull it out and do more retests. So there's a lot of people activity in the capsule, and I'm sure some of them trampled on wiring harnesses and that kind of thing, just with that kind of activity. Same way at Grumman that was going on constantly. And I understood he really obviously was replaced from the program manager role. I think he went off to Raytheon, is what my knowledge base of what I remember, as a corporate officer at Raytheon. But I know he was personally, when I read anyway and heard, personally affected by a guilt feeling of responsibility, which any program manager would when that happens under your watch, so to speak.
All right, we got another one right over here.
Thank you, Mr. Haise. Thank you, and Mr. Massimino. Can you talk about your experience in Bethpage on the LEM development and how that came into play during your time in the lifeboat, so to speak?
How my limb training? You mean at Grumman? Yeah. No, not much of that came into play because the most stuff we dealt with in the testing at a vehicle was at a level below what you really did and used the vehicle in flying it. So I was more in depth knowledge than I needed. For instance, to fly the limb or to be involved in these alternate procedures. So it really obviously gave me confidence in the limb because I had been so much involved in its testing and felt we had a good product that was going to enable us to last, two-day vehicle to last 4 days, which it wasn't supposed to do, and get us back.
Okay, right over here.
What did you feel like right when you like heard or like figured out what the problem was and that the problem existed? Like, what was your like emotion, kind of?
Well, I mentioned it. I felt when the explosion happened and we knew we had lost that tank, one oxygen tank, I was just sick to my stomach. I really was. I just a pit in my stomach, as I had lost the mission, the mission of landing on the moon. I knew we would not even go into lunar orbit. Even if the leak had not happened in the second tank, I knew they would not put us in lunar orbit with only one tank left. So that'd be the end of the mission. They'd get us home as quick as possible.
Okay, over here. Over here.
Hi, Fred. Thanks a lot for doing this. I'm really excited about any Apollo lecture where people can hear it and keeping it going. It's great. I want to ask you, you did a lot of dangerous things. What was, I think, maybe one of the most dangerous, what was it like to pilot the lunar landing training vehicle?
Okay, yeah, the lunar landing training vehicle was always exciting. I flew 22 times. And the lunar landing training vehicle, we crashed 3 of them. 3 people ejected. Neil Armstrong, Al Granny, and Stu Present. 3 people ejected, so we were down at the end of the program with only 1 vehicle left. They wanted to get it, the management wanted to get rid of it, and Neil, after his crash, talked to him and said, no, you need that, because that puts the pilot in a position with the right adrenaline flow and the pressure and feelings he's going to have to deal with. And every time you were short of fuel, landing that vehicle, just as you ended up with the people that landed on the moon. Now you had a pseudo abort because it involved a jet engine that supported it mainly, but when you went into sim mode, the jet engine through the computer cycled to put you in a 1.6G, and you're descending, and you're depending now on 2 rockets firing down, hydrogen peroxide rockets, to arrest the descent, like we did, like the descent engine on the LEM. So, and you had a manual handle for a throttle to control the landing. So that was and also the jet engine gimbal to negate air drag. So in essence, it puts you in a vacuum as you're flying the vehicle. But always, you didn't have a lot of fuel left, but you very quickly could switch back out of sim to the jet engine, and then you pretty much were sort of a helicopter with a different set of controls. But you could probably pretty quickly get it on the ground if you had to, when you got down low on fuel and the rocket engine fuel. But it puts you in that corner. You wanted to make a landing, a good landing, and get a good grade. So it puts you in that mode of fighting it right down to the last seconds to get the thing on the ground okay.
All right, one more question over here.
What did you do to spend your time during your days on the way back to Earth?
Mostly just looking out the window. There wasn't anything else to do. And the way we shifted for 2 days was I was on alone, and Jim and Jack would be on, and we'd swap out. And then the command module got so cold that we all stayed in the LEM. So all 3 of us stayed in the lunar module for the next 2 days. So there was you didn't do anything until you got the next set of procedures, or what the mission control had figured out, and people on the ground had figured out what to do next, and then they read that up, and we'd proceed to execute what we were given at that point. Now, we didn't ad-lib anything. No, this was done with most of the brain power on the ground.
All right, and we have a question from our viewers at home on the internet.
Hey, thanks, Fred. We've got a quick question from our NASA Spaceflight and Intrepid viewers who are watching back at home. If you had an opportunity now to go back to the moon on one of the new commercial spacecraft, would you sign up to do it?
If I could lose about 20 years. I hit 89 years old in another couple of months, and I'm not fragile, but I'm not as young as I used to be.
All right. Well, everyone, we have to get started with our book signing soon. If you have a question, I'm sure as we're in line, you'd be happy to answer a couple more. I know we could spend all night here listening to your wonderful stories and asking all these questions, and we wish we had more time, but thank you all so much. I'm going to actually pop up here real fast. Put your hands together one more time. Amazing. Thank you so much for being here. Such incredible stories. Really, like, standing ovation. Amazing. All right, everyone. So we are going to take a little bit of a pause now. We are going to reset and get ready for that book signing. If you have your books handy, great. If you have something else you wanted to get signed, that's fine too. We're going to be kind of resetting back over in that corner over there. But otherwise, everyone have a wonderful rest of your night here at the Intrepid Museum. Check out some of the other activities that we have going on, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Book signing.
No. We'll wait around.
Yeah.
I don't know where they're...
That was one.
We gotta wrap it up.
Yeah.
Should be that. And I think that should be us. Chat, let us know real quick if you can hear us. John Galloway here. Got Alicia Seagull with me from the museum. You just heard from both of us, mostly her though. Let me know if you can hear us because I'm sort of jiggling the audio here. So 5x5s, is this working correctly? Good. Okay, 5x5. Okay, good. We got 5x5s. Whew. Thanks. So a little bit of a new thing. This is actually how the virtual astronomy nights originally got started. Used to be they would do events like this almost every month here at the museum, and I would come out with all our live streaming stuff, and we would help the museum live stream it. And then when COVID, the pandemic happened, we sort of went to that virtual format. But this is what we used to do all the time, and this is the first time we've done it in a couple of years.
And we're so happy that everything is happening here and that we're back doing this again. So thanks everyone for tuning in. Of course, if you liked it, let us know.
It's true.
Feedback's always good, but I think this was a spectacular night. I mean, Fred Haise.
It was. We were gonna start the question sooner, but we just wanted to hear his stories. Just let him tell his stories. And that's what we ended up doing there. Hope y'all enjoyed it. We haven't done a lot of streams like this. It was a little bit of a, is it gonna happen, is it not? And then all the lights aligned at the end, and we were able to hop in here and share this with you. But if it's the sort of content you like, you know how to get back here. You may be watching on one of many channels. If you're watching over on the Twitch channels or Facebook or YouTube or whatever, like and subscribe or whatever.
Do all the things.
I don't think you say it unironically. You say it unironically. I'm like and subscribe. Whatever. But you know how to get back to the channels if this is the sort of stuff you want to see. Hopefully we have an opportunity to do more stuff like this here at the museum and all the other cool stuff we do. But I think for now, that is going to be the end of our broadcast, right?
Yeah. Thank you so much for tuning in, everyone.
Come
visit the Intrepid Museum here in New York City if you happen to be here. We are literally standing underneath the Enterprise right now.
It's true. Maybe that's what we'll do at the end. We'll point the camera up there.
And that thing.
We'll just let y'all look at the back of the space shuttle out. But thanks for watching, y'all. We're going to go ahead and roll the outros here, and we will see you nerds later. That was a fantastic talk. Nice. Show us some space shuttle here.
Propulsion continues to be nominal.
Our EDT pressure looks good. Toggling up.
Water towers can fly!
Tango Delta nominal.
Flight outside SCE off. Say again, SCE off.
Yikes. You bet. Concur. We don't need any more of these.